welcome, and thank you for joining us today for an overview of Regulation 87, Colorado's new state dredge and fill program and how it intersects with stream and wetland restoration projects. Good morning, everyone. I'm Abby Burke, the Western Rivers Program Director at Audubon Rockies and co-chair of the Colorado Healthy Headwaters Working Group. I'll be your host for today's webinar. My background is in stream ecology and restoration practice, and today my work sits at the intersection of water policy and project implementation and conservation strategies. At Audubon, I lead an interdisciplinary team supporting stream and wetland restoration projects, advancing partner efforts and helping align policy and funding to benefit Colorado's rivers, wetlands, birds, and communities. A core part of my role is bringing people together to connect policy, funding, and on-the-ground projects in practical and durable ways. I'm truly glad you're here. Before we begin, I'd like to invite today's co-presenters to give a quick introduction on who you are and your role in this work before we get started. So first, I'd like to give it to my colleague, Nathan. Go ahead, Nathan.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Nathan Boyer-Recklin. I work with Abby as well as Jackie Corday for Audubon as the Western Rivers Program Specialist.
Great. And thank you, Nathan, for being our behind the scenes guide today, running all of the presentations. So thank you for that. Next, how about our colleague and co-chair of the Colorado Healthy Headwaters Working Group, Jackie?
Hi, everyone. I'm here in Montrose, Colorado, and I'm a land and water conservation attorney, and I work with Abby and Nathan.
Great. Thank you, Jackie. And we are very grateful to welcome our partners from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, Annette Quill and Kelly Morgan. Annette, would you like to lead off?
Sure. Thanks, Abby. I'm Annette Quill. For those of you who don't know me, I am the policy advisor for the Water Quality Control Division, and I was part of the team very heavily involved in the stakeholder efforts for both the legislation that began this whole process, and then for the development of Regulation 87, which the Water Quality Control Commission just took final action on earlier this week. So thanks for being here.
Thanks, Annette. And Kelly?
Thanks, Abby. Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Morgan. I'm also with the Water Quality Control Division, and I manage the Compliance and Enforcement section, which houses the Dredge and Fill Protection Unit, who will be implementing the program now that the regulation is done.
Fantastic. Thank you both for joining us this morning. I really appreciate it. And Annette and Kelly, thank you for your leadership and partnership throughout the development of House Bill 24-1379 and Regulation 87. This was a significant nation-leading effort, and your team facilitated an inclusive and thoughtful process that has shaped a strong final program. And so with that, let's dive in. And I want to kind of talk just for a second about housekeeping. We have over, 100 registrants and for this webinar, so we are kindly keeping the audience muted and cameras off. But I do want to encourage you to please add in your thoughts, your questions into the chat when inspiration arises, and we will hold 15 minutes at the end of the presentation to address questions and answers. Nathan, can we go to the next slide, please? This webinar is hosted by the Colorado Healthy Headwaters Working Group, or HWOG is our acronym. Our goal is to support dialogue, understanding, and action around stream and wetland restoration, especially in light of Colorado's new state wetlands program created by House Bill 24-1379 and implemented through Regulation 87. And of course, all of this work while respecting water rights. HWOG is a statewide network co-chaired by Jackie and me and Faye Hartman from American Rivers since 2020, with support from Nathan from Audubon Rockies. And we work in partnership with leaders from agencies, academia, philanthropy, conservation groups, and restoration practitioners, all committed to advancing durable stream and wetland restoration in Colorado. Our work focuses on increasing the pace and scale of restoration by translating policy, law, and science into practical guidance, supporting real projects and bringing people together across water sectors. We maintain a website with low-tech process-based restoration resources. And if you're not already on our e-list, we encourage you to sign up. Members receive a quarterly newsletter, timely science updates, and invitations to webinars like this one today. HWOG is the only statewide collaborative working at the intersection of stream restoration, policy, and implementation. Nathan, let's go to the next slide, please. And so what are we covering today? We're really going to dive into the passage of 1379, which was in 2024, and the efforts, led by the Water Quality Control Commission around Regulation 87 and the rulemaking that completed in 2025, and an overview of how this process all relates to stream restoration projects. And then next, following Annette and Kelly's presentation, Jackie and I will cover some of the state permitting requirements for different types of streams and wetland systems that you're restoring, whether we're talking about ephemerals or intermittents, perennials, non-WOTUS wetlands, et cetera, all of that. So really appreciate that. And Nathan, let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Annette and Kelly.
Thanks, Abby. Great introduction. So we'd like to first start now about dredge and fill program implementation. I'm sure a lot of you participated in the stakeholder efforts that Annette mentioned. And so now we're excited to move into the next phase of implementation. So we can go ahead and get into the slides here about background and implementation. And so we'll just dive right in. And as Abby mentioned, the next presentation will cover in part how the program will address activities, including restoration. So we won't dive too deep in that in this part. We'll talk mostly about some logistics about program implementation to help practitioners better understand the requirements of the program and how to, abide by those requirements. So current status of program implementation, beginning on January 1st, 2025, we began issuing temporary authorizations for the discharge of dredge and fill materials into state waters. Previously, prior to January 1st, 2025, projects were allowed to move forward under a policy, Clean Water Policy 17, that was an enforcement discretion policy. But that transitioned into the temporary authorization framework beginning in January. And then kind of the next major milestone that we achieved this month was we issued the general authorization for discharges of dredge and fill materials into isolated state waters. That authorization was noticed for public comment last summer. And so we were able to finalize that. We'll get a little bit into that and talk about where you can find that document if you're curious. And then our next step in program implementation, beginning in April, we'll begin noticing all of our other general authorizations for public comment. Again, these general authorizations will follow the framework of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers nationwide and regional general permits. We will be noticing these authorizations in batches. So April and May, we'll set out 2 batches for public comment. It'll be a 30-day public comment period. And our goal or requirement actually under the House bill is that all of those general authorizations are effective by September 1st, 2026. So beginning in September, folks will be required to apply for a general authorization, and we'll be issuing notices of coverage specific to your project. I just wanted to also cover briefly exemptions and exclusions. I think we'll get into this a little bit more in depth in the next presentation as well, but for some general understanding that Colorado has 14 exempted activities and has defined 11 excluded water features. Most of those are consistent with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers exemptions and exclusions, but we did add some Colorado-specific exemptions and exclusions. I would like to note that we do have exemption and exclusion guidance available on our website, and if you're interested in having the division help you make a decision whether or not an exemption or exclusion applies to your project, you can submit a request for an exemption or exclusion determination via our website, and I'll get you to our website in a moment. So diving more into temporary authorizations, again, just a reminder, those are the authorizations that we're utilizing currently to allow projects to move forward. Temporary authorizations serve as an interim solution. So that was implemented in the House bill in order to allow projects to continue before we were able to issue general and individual authorizations after the rulemaking occurred. Again, on January 1st, if any person who's seeking to have an authorized activity for dredge and fill is required to seek a temporary authorization. I just wanted to note that if you had a project where you were operating under Clean Water 17, the enforcement discretion policy, but if your project has not initiated yet or been completed, you will be required to apply for a temporary authorization. You should have been contacted last week if that is the case, but if you have questions about your particular project, we're happy to field those, and I'll get you the contact information in the chat when we're done with this presentation. We are also encouraging folks, if that is the case, to apply for a temporary authorization prior to March 31st, 2026, in part because fees become effective April 1st, 2026. The duration for temporary authorizations is 2 years. And for temporary authorizations issued before August 2026, they'll be valid for that full 2-year term, with the exception of if your project has not commenced yet. So if that is the case, then you would be required to seek a general authorization. A little bit more about temporary authorizations. These are the requirements for projects to seek a temporary authorization. If your project meets one or more of the criteria outlined on this slide, you will be required to seek a temporary authorization. Alternatively, temporary authorizations are not required for projects that occur either in jurisdictional waters of the United States, occur in isolated state waters, which is a separate authorization that we just noticed this week. And then a project can proceed without pre-construction notification. And again, a temporary authorization is not required if your activity is exempted or the water feature that you're working in is an excluded feature. So if you are undertaking a project that would be subject to obtaining a temporary authorization, I'm going to go through and walk folks through the steps to seek and obtain a temporary authorization. So first is to go to our website. There's a QR code here. You should be able to link that to our website. But again, I'll put the full website in the chat when we're done with our presentation, so you have easy access to that. The first step, obviously, is visiting our website. The second step is to follow the instructions that are on our website about how to complete the application. So you'll notice here that we have 3 buttons on our website. The blue button is the notice of temporary authorization itself, so you can review that document to see what the actual temporary authorization would look like for your project. And then the next step would be step number 3, to complete an application. So you'll complete your application via that red button. We did try to the extent that we could to mirror the application off of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, just so we could provide some consistency and familiarity to folks. There, you can also have the ability to include attachments, especially in the case of if your project would require compensatory mitigation. And then the final step is to submit the application. You can do that online via the form that's available. And just a note here that as we're building out our program, and once we move closer to the general authorizations becoming effective, The applications for general authorization will mirror this process. So you'll have the ability to file your application electronically via our website. So as I mentioned earlier, we recently made the isolated state water general authorization effective. So we can move to the next slide, sorry. A copy of the isolated state water general authorization is available on our website. Just a few notes here that the House bill directed the division specifically to issue this isolated state waters general authorization. And it gave us the ability to issue that general authorization prior to the regulation becoming effective. And so as I noted earlier, we did notice that authorization for public comment last summer and finalized that earlier in February. Just a few key things to note here is that the term isolated is any feature that's outside the 100-year floodplain or beyond 1,500 feet of an ordinary high water mark. The isolated state waters authorization applies to isolated wetlands, ponds and impoundments, and ordinary high water mark reaches. It does not apply to fens, peatlands, and kettle ponds. So if your project was to impact one of those features, you would have to contact the division and seek an alternate type of authorization for your project. Then moving along to the isolated state waters general authorization. Some key components here is that pre-construction notification is not required, so you don't need to apply for coverage under an isolated state waters general authorization. We are requesting that certain project information be submitted within 90 days after project completion. One of the main reasons for that is we would just like to be able to understand the scope of the projects that are being undertaken under this particular authorization. So again, just like our temporary authorizations, the isolated waters authorization incorporates best management practices, including some certain control measure requirements in order to protect those water features. If your project will have unavoidable adverse impacts to an isolated feature exceeding 1/10 of an acre of wetland or 3/100 of an acre of stream bed, you would not be eligible for coverage under this particular general authorization. And again, you could contact the division in that case for more information and some feedback on what type of authorization would be required. So with that, I will toss it over to Annette to cover general authorizations. Annette, you're on mute.
Sorry, you think I'd learned by now. Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate all of that information. I'm going to talk about general authorizations. And again, this is, everybody's just kind of getting used to all this new terminology with our program. But our general authorizations are our version of the Corps' nationwide permits. And the legislation, House Bill 241379, required that the division issue general authorizations no later than September 1st, 2026. And those, again, will correspond with the various nationwide categories. All the numbering will remain the same from the nationwide, so it'll just be called Colorado General Authorization 27 or 13 or what have you. These general authorizations, as Kelly said, once they're issued by the division per the processes that are set forth in Regulation 87, they will replace the temporary authorizations that folks are doing projects under right now. So as I said, they have to correspond with the various nationwide and regional general permits that the Corps issues. And they also will have the same generally the same terms and conditions. So when you see them, I'll talk a little bit about the timing of these as we go along. But as you see them, they're going to look familiar to those who have operated under, say, Nationwide 27. The terms and conditions are generally going to be the same. We just won't have some of the same requirements, such as the ESA consultation, things like that in the federal permits. But they will generally look the same as what everybody has been used to. The legislation does allow for the Water Quality Control Division to tailor the terms of our general authorizations. We don't have to be lockstep with the Corps. We, as we go along with this program and kind of learn things that are, that might suit our program better, we can change the terms to suit our needs. But for right now, we're not doing much of that. You will see some differences, but generally they're going to look the same as the federal, nationwide, and regional general permits. Next slide. Individual authorizations. These generally are not going to be required for most of the projects that you all would be working on. They're really required for larger projects that don't fall within the scope of general authorizations, such as, GA 27. They will be required for activities that result in permanent loss of state waters, with a threshold of typically 0.5 acres of wetlands, or on a case-by-case basis, the division can determine that if a project is going to result in more than minimal individual or cumulative adverse impacts, then we can require an individual authorization. And I will note that it kind of going back to the general authorizations, we will also have the same pre-construction notification requirements that are found in the corresponding nationwides. So, those with general authorizations and individual authorizations, those are the only times that, folks have to notify us of projects is when, there's pre-construction notification that is required under a general authorization, or for all individual authorizations. Of course, we have a detailed application process that is set forth in Reg 87 at Section 87.6. Okay, next slide. Oh, Nathan, you can go to the next slide. Thanks. So this, for any project that submits, that has to submit a pre-construction notification to operate under a general authorization, or for all individual authorizations, did you sorry, Nathan, we're skipping around. Did you skip a slide, or was that? Yeah. So I'm sorry. I thought we had one more slide on individual authorizations. I'll just give a little bit more detail here. So once Regulation 87 becomes effective, and this should be, as I mentioned, the Commission just finalized it earlier this week, but it has to jump through some hoops with the Secretary of State's office. It should become effective at the beginning of April. And once that becomes effective, that's when we can actually accept applications for individual authorizations and start working on those under the procedures that are in the regulation. So they adopted very detailed requirements. Sorry, Nathan. They adopted very detailed requirements for individual authorization applications, which essentially mirror the Corps' requirements, and also have our version of kind of that pre-NEPA process that has a LEDPA requirement for the alternative, the least environmentally damaging practicable alternative. That's part of the process as well. And we also have the ability to impose conditions to ensure that water quality is protected, just as we do with our 401 certifications under the 404 process. We'll also be including monitoring, record keeping, and reporting requirements in the individual authorizations themselves. But for all the details on individual authorizations, those can be found in Regulation 87 at 87.6. Okay, now we're ready to talk about project completion. So this is important. Again, these are for any project that would be operating under a general authorization that required pre-construction notification, and for any individual authorization. It's important in terms of fees, which I think Jackie is going to talk about in a little while. But once a project is complete, the project proponent will submit a request for a certification of project completion. And this will be, probably a simple Google form. And it just notifies the division that that these 3 bullets at the bottom, that it's once the discharge, the dredge and fill activity has been completed and temporary impacts have been restored, and that all conditions of that authorization, including any compensatory mitigation, are satisfied. Jackie will go into some nuances with our general authorization 27 for aquatic habitat restoration. There's some nuances there. But the division then will issue a certification of project completion, and that's when the annual fee component or obligation will cease. So that's when everything will be finished with the division and no more obligations with us. And like I said, Jackie will go in a little bit more on how that will work with nationwide or general authorization 27. And if you all have any questions, we're happy to answer them. Thank you.
Great. Annette, Kelly, thank you so much. Really appreciate all the great conversation and rich questions and the answers coming into the chat. So please do continue to put your questions in the chat. We'll answer them as much as we can, or we will be able to have a session live at the conclusion of our presentation today. So keep those questions coming. Thanks everyone for answering them in the chat as we're able to. And Jackie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, so for those of you who might feel a little intimidated by a Regulation 87 that's over 100 pages long and trying to figure out where do I begin, this is what I'm going to try to do for you today, is try to put it into a workable framework of how do you figure out what you need to do. And so there's really 2 main steps to analyze whether or not a state authorization is needed for your restoration project. And the first one that is super helpful to determine is what type of stream system are you restoring? Is it ephemeral, with or without wet meadows? Is it intermittent with riverine wetlands, perennial with riverine wetlands, or isolated wetlands? And second, as Kelly talked about, you need to think about, does an exemption, an exempt activity, or an excluded water type apply to your project? So that's what I'm going to walk you through today in my slides. Next, please. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to deal with is activities that are exempt from the requirements of having to get an authorization. And as Kelly mentioned, there are 14 different exempt activities, and some of those apply to restoration projects. So that's what we're going to focus on next. So restoring ephemeral systems, this is the first exemption that we're going to talk about. So if where you're working may have had or they still have wetlands, then your project may qualify for a permit exemption, which means that you don't have to go and apply for a general authorization from CDPHE. So I apologize in advance for how dense this slide is, but I wanted to make sure you saw the language that's coming right out of Regulation 87. There's 5 criteria in Reg 87 to determine whether or not your project may um, qualify for this exemption. So first of all, it has to be voluntary, meaning the first bullet, it does not require compensatory mitigation. This project is being done as a voluntary, whether that's on private or public land, and it's not being done for, say, to create a mitigation bank. Second, the project is designed solely to provide ecological lift. On the next slide, there's a definition of ecological lift and also a definition of ephemeral stream. Third bullet, that's a pretty long one. It does not lower the elevation of the stream bed, or basically it doesn't cause significant changes like channelization, incision, or disconnection from the floodplain. Fourth bullet, it doesn't use riprap, grouted riprap, or concrete or other unnatural materials. And number 5, the project manager must employ sufficient planning and practices to ensure it does not result in demonstrable ecological harm. I have a slide just on that. So here's the 2 definitions for ephemeral stream and ecological lift, part of the criteria. And I'm going to let you read that for just a moment and pause there before we go on. Okay, the next slide. Okay, so to try to flesh this out, 5 criteria are a lot, and there's probably some new words that need explaining. And so the Healthy Rivers Coalition members worked with CPW, the AG's office, and CDPHE staff to draft a guidance that provides additional info for project managers. So when you look at this guidance, and Nathan is going to put into the chat that link to the document so that you can spend more time reading it. But what you'll see is that there's more information on what is sufficient planning. What does that mean? What is sufficient operation practices? It gives a lot of good guidance on that. What about restoration materials and equipment? There's guidance on that. Best management practices for preventing spread of invasive species and pre and post construction site and access management to reduce construction impacts. There's guidance on that. And then there's demonstrable ecological harm. It defines what is that and how is it determined. And so this guidance, you'll see that the word draft is still there in the link to the guidance. That's because there's still a little bit of fine tuning that needs to be done, and that will happen this year. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so we just wanted to throw in a few slides for folks who may or may not be familiar with ephemeral stream wet meadows restoration. I think most of you on this call are, but here's just some classic photos of what that looks like and exactly what that exemption is meant to get at. How it was crafted was really to try to get at these types of projects do not need to get a state permit. They don't need to get a federal permit if they meet all of those criteria. And this is pretty much what they look like, is working in these rangeland wet meadow areas that have these nasty head cuts that are moving up the valley and destroying those wetlands. And so these are projects to stop that erosion from occurring. Next. Just some more examples. And Sean Connor Biologic provided these photos of some of his projects, which just are so illustrative of what how important this work is, and that this will be able to move forward without having to get a permit. And then there's this technical note that is a really great document that explains much more about this type of restoration work. And I think I have one last photo there. This is one other project that Abby and I were fortunate to go and visit and see in 2021 when the work was done. And just 2 years later, all of those rocks that were laid down to stop that erosional head cut, you can't even see them anymore, and the grass has grown back lush and green. Okay, next. Okay, so that was all just to talk about doing voluntary restoration work in ephemeral streams for ecological lift are an exempt activity. Now we're going to talk about excluded types of waters, and authorization is not required for certain types of excluded waters, and there's 11 of them. And one of them is pertinent to restoration. So if you are working on restoring an ephemeral system that does not have, or never had, as far as you can tell, wetlands or an ordinary high water mark, then your project qualifies for an exclusion. So you can see the definition of excluded waters. In this particular case, it says swales and erosional features such as gullies, small washes, and rills that do not contain wetlands or ordinary high water mark. So again, this is now excluded from you having to get a general authorization if you're working in these kind of systems to restore them. Next. So what's really important, I can't remember if it was Kelly or Annette touched on this, but this is important to note that if you are working in these kinds of systems, a project proponent is not required to consult with the division on whether their project qualifies as an exempt activity or it's an excluded water feature. However, if a project proponent seeks the division's concurrence that an exemption or exclusion does in fact apply to their project, then this is a great way that you have an avenue to go online, click on that form and fill out that form. And Nathan just put that form into the chat so that you can save that for later reference. But so just to recap this, if you think you are working in an ephemeral stream and you think you qualify for the voluntary stream restoration for ecological lift, that's an exempt activity. Or if you're working in a gully or wash with no wetlands, that's excluded. But you want to make sure, let's say your funders or your project partners think, hey, I think it'd be really good to get something in writing that we do in fact qualify for this exemption or this exclusion. Now you have a process and a way to do that. Okay, next. I just wanted to show one more relevant exempted activity that is in Reg 87. So again, no state general authorization or permit is required. And this one was specifically crafted for the situation where agencies, whether that's a state or the federal agency, are managing these big, large wetland complexes. So think of the San Luis Valley, where there are a lot of large managed wetland complexes, and they have to do a lot of maintenance in those areas. And so they wanted to make sure that they could do that maintenance without having to get a general authorization when they were doing that all the time. And so that's what this language is specifically getting at, those situations. Okay, next. All right, so now we've gone through ephemeral systems and what may apply in those situations. Now we're going to go to intermittent systems. And this is still one of the gray areas of whether or not it is a WOTUS. You know that there's more changes that are coming down from the EPA. We don't know where that's going to land, but fortunately, we now live in a state where it's not as critical, because whether an intermittent stream is a WOTUS, if it is still a WOTUS, then you're going to go and get your 404 permit. If it's not a WOTUS, if it's a non-WOTUS, then you're going to go and get your state permit. That's generally the bifurcation here that we're dealing with on intermittent streams. So look at the green highlight bullet there, the second bullet. So your project will not require a separate state permit if the entire project that you're working in is within a WOTUS and covered under a 404 permit, because that situation is specifically listed in Reg 87 as an exempt activity. So it's an exempt activity because you have a 404 permit that covers the whole activity. But what if you have a situation where you have both? Like, what if it covers both? Well, then you're probably going to need both permits. If you've got a WOTUS section of your project that's an intermittent stream and you have a non-WOTUS section, well, you're going to need both. And I think that's what I mentioned on the next slide, Nathan. Yeah, so restoring intermittent streams that are non-WOTUS, a state authorization is going to be required because there are no exempt activities or exclusions that apply to intermittent streams. So if no 404 permit is needed because it's not a WOTUS, it is then a non-WOTUS, and you're going to need to get your general authorization that is equivalent to the nationwide 27. Okay, so the timing application, and Kelly and Annette touched on this. This is just a quick recap in one slide. So for intermittent streams, if your project is scheduled for early 2026, then you'll need to apply for that temporary authorization that they mentioned, and they will have something that's equivalent to the nationwide 27. That's you're going to see requirements and language that's very similar to that. But what if you're looking at, you got your funding maybe this spring, and so you're not going to start until summer or fall? Well, then you're probably going to be in time for the state version of the nationwide 27 will have been adopted by then, and you can apply for that directly on CDPHE's website, as Kelly walked you through how you do that. And again, there's the link to that particular website that Nathan will put into the chat. Okay. Just a picture of a classic intermittent stream in Western Colorado. So you can see the project there was kind of a post-assisted log structure that had a lot of accumulation when the spring runoff went through. This is the kind of project now that you would be required to apply for a state general authorization that resembles the nationwide 27 equivalent. Okay. Then the last one, as far as stream classifications, is perennial systems. This is the one that's kind of black and white. There's not a gray area here. These systems are WOTUS, and thus it's going to require a 404 permit, the nationwide 27. And then the second bullet there addresses, well, what if you've got both a WOTUS and a non-WOTUS? Then you're going to need both a federal permit and a state permit. Okay. Now I'm going to turn it over to Abby.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks so much. And again, just to encourage folks to keep the good questions coming into the chat while we are wrapping up these last couple of slides. And so on this particular slide, I want to acknowledge something we heard loudly from practitioners throughout the rulemaking, that fees can be a real barrier for stream and wetland restoration, especially for the many projects operating on shoestring budgets. A big point here is the fee structure for projects that align with the nationwide Permit 27 and equivalent activities. So early Regulation 87 drafts included a much higher fee level, around $4,300. That would have been a serious hit for restoration practitioners. Through sustained inputs from the Healthy Rivers Coalition that was facilitated by Audubon, the commission and the department recognized that concern, and the fee was reduced to $500. This was much appreciated and will make a significant difference in, for numerous stream restoration projects and our partners going forward. Another big improvement that we pushed for was clarity around when the annual fee stops. Earlier draft language could be read as requiring an annual fee on the anniversary of coverage, even when monitoring was the only remaining yearly task. We flagged that as, fairly unworkable. Once a restoration project is built and you're only doing monitoring and maintenance, practitioners should not be paying that annual program fee year after year. As a result of the Healthy Rivers Coalition feedback, a last-minute edit was made to Regulation 87 to clearly establish a process of filing for a certification of project completion so that nationwide Permit 27 type projects do not continue to incur the annual $500 fee once construction is complete and only monitoring and maintenance remain. Nathan, thanks. So this last slide here, one of the last slides covers the CDPHE consultation fees, which is another area practitioners were understandably anxious about. The basic structure is CDPHE consultation is billed at $180 per hour, but importantly, CDPHE is providing up to 2 hours of consultation per project at no cost. That's a meaningful commitment, and for many smaller restoration efforts, 2 hours may be sufficient if the project proponent is prepared, and we'll continue to talk about that a little bit. The biggest advice we can offer practitioners is come in with clarity. Be ready to clearly describe, 1, your project's purpose and scope. 2, where you're working. What type of system are you working in? And 3rd, what activities you're proposing. If you've got that lined up, similar kind of to how we approach Senate Bill 270, the stream restoration kind of compliance conversations, you can get a clear answer efficiently without running up consultation time. The goal here is to help practitioners understand whether they're exempt, excluded, or need a permit pathway without unnecessary back and forth. And importantly, CDPHE has built an avenue for practitioners to request help. There's a consultation request process and a form that, we'll all make sure that gets shared, in the follow-up materials and, also here in the chat. I think it might have already been popped into the chat. So the headline, consultation can be navigated in a predictable way, and there are 2 free hours, which are intended to help restoration practitioners get clarity early. And so with that, I'll pause for a second and just keep those questions coming into the chat as we go. And we'll be able to triage some of those answers and also have a live session here and how to best route answers to these questions. Next slide, Nathan. One of the last ones here. Thanks. And so this slide is meant to level set how dredge and fill permitting applies to voluntary restoration of streams, contiguous riverine wetlands, and non-WOTUS wetlands. The most important starting point for any project is understanding what type of system you're working in, whether it's ephemeral, intermittent, or perennial, or a non-WOTUS wetland. That determination drives which permit may be required and whether those requirements are federal, state, or both. For some projects, federal permitting may still apply. For others, particularly non-WOTUS wetlands or certain stream types, Colorado's state dredge and fill program under Regulation 87 may be the primary pathway for you. In some cases, projects will need to navigate both federal and state processes. The key takeaway is that early clarity on system type helps avoid delays, unnecessary costs, and confusion. And knowing where you're working allows practitioners to choose the correct permitting pathway and engage the right agency early, which ultimately makes restoration more efficient and predictable. Next slide, and I think this is the actual last one. So looking ahead into some of the work that we have coming in 2026, we're anticipating in fall of 26, we're going to kind of look at developing a Healthy Headwaters Working Group Regulation 87 practitioner handout, similarly modeled after what we did around Senate Bill 270 stream restorations training manual, and hopefully to provide clear practical guidance for restoration projects. Also in 26, we're looking at hosting a webinar on kind of refreshing everyone's knowledge around Senate Bill 270 for practitioners, who may be new to stream restoration in Colorado or want an updated overview. Sometimes you can't hear this information enough to really get it to soak in. And then also we have some exciting workshops that will be continuing to bring people together and convene around low-tech process-based restoration to build this on-the-ground capacity and share best practices statewide. Okay. So definitely make sure that you reach out if you're not on our Healthy Headwaters Working Group newsletter. You can even just drop it into the chat and we're happy to add you your email address so that you receive these quarterly newsletters and some of these event updates and announcements. So with that, I think we're going to open up into some questions. And as we're getting started, we've had a couple of more technical questions come into the chat, but I'd like to zoom out for a second and get our presenters' ideas on something that's been rolling around in my mind. And I know we're very early in this process around Regulation 87. But what I'd love to ask you all is, what do you see as the biggest opportunity that Regulation 87 creates for improving restoration outcomes in Colorado? And feel free, whoever would like to jump in for that response, you're welcome to. Whoop, Annette, okay, we almost got you. I think you're on mute still.
I'm sorry, Abby. I was busy trying to answer questions in the chat. I'm sorry to have you repeat it again.
Oh, I am happy to.
I was just trying to triage those questions.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, because there are some very heavy questions, very technical questions that are coming in. So thank you all to the panelists for that.
And I'd love for you all to, to the extent we don't have time to answer all of them here, if we can kind of get them in one place so that we could get back with folks.
Absolutely. We will absolutely commit to that.
Okay. Do you want?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to repeat this question. This is kind of more zoomed out because I feel like the questions in the chat are very zoomed in. Mm-hmm. And so being able to just kind of reflect for some early moments here in Regulation 87, I'd love to know your thoughts on what do you see as the biggest opportunity that Regulation 87 creates for improving restoration outcomes in Colorado?
Okay. Well, I can start with that. As I mentioned during one of the slides I was talking about, we definitely are trying to model our program after the CORS program. But at the same time, we have the opportunity to tailor our general authorizations to fit our needs. And, working with groups, like yours, we would like to, after we get our feet under us, and get this first round of general authorizations out, we would like to work to craft a state-specific general authorization for aquatic habitat restoration. Just kind of partnering with you, kind of learning what you think would be helpful, in crafting that particular general authorization. I didn't mention this during my presentation, but in this first round of issuing general authorizations, we are required to use the 2021 Corps of Engineers permits, nationwide permits as our templates. But going forward, we would love to learn what would be beneficial and what would help promote, stream restoration activities. We think it's a perfect opportunity to have, a state-specific authorization that we would, craft ourselves, to, again, partnering with you to work on the terms for that.
Thank you.
Kelly, do you have anything to add?
I think that was a good summary. And then I think the only thing that I would add is that with this program, we'll be better able to track and monitor stream restoration projects that are being done throughout the state. So we can not only track the projects, but also the outcomes to give the state a better sense of the number of restoration projects that are occurring throughout the state and, the outcomes, duration, things like that type of data to help inform some future program implementation.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, we can get into some of the more, some of the technical questions. I'm going to be lifting these out of the kind of the Q&A and summarizing those a little bit for us to consider. And here's one I feel that's probably on a couple of folks' minds. But does the wildlife habitat management activity exemption only apply to ephemeral drainages? Is intermittent, yes or no, included?
Intermittent is included. This is one of the ones I was trying to answer in the chat. That is a detailed exemption for wildlife habitat management activities that was put into the bill itself, which of course is also in the regulation. And it's, like I said, it's pretty detailed as to what it covers, but I believe it covers, it is not limited to ephemerals. That's a separate exemption. So, take a look at the regulation and the wording of the regulation. And if your project fits within, that activity description, then it would be exempt as well. This, of course, is something that doesn't exist in the federal framework. This is something that is Colorado specific, this exemption. So thanks for that question. That's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. Jackie, do you want to start?
I've noticed there's quite a few questions that confuse federal processes in the chat. And so I just thought it would be good to get responses to that to make sure folks feel like they're getting their question answered on that. There was one from Josh about if you had a CADX, are you good to go? Are you good to go, or do you still need to get either a 404 or a state general authorization, depending on the stream type that you're working in? And then there was one from Cody, who asked if NRCS EKIP projects need to apply for state or federal permits as applicable. So there's such an alphabet soup out there of federal permits and federal requirements. And so it's so easy to get this mixed up. So I just want to make sure folks understand that just because there's federal involvement, whether it's NEPA analysis, which is what a CADX is, or a program, a funding program like NRCS EKIP, that is separate from the analysis of what permit you need to work in the stream. So I just want to make sure that's clear. You still have to go through that analysis of, is it a WOTUS? Do I need, if so, then I'm going to need a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers 404 nationwide 27 permit. If it's non-WOTUS, then you would go through that analysis that I walked you through in my slides. Where are you working? Ephemeral, intermittent? And then there's that analysis. So there's a lot to take in here. So we will be sharing this recording with folks so that you can go back over it. And again, we're going to put together the training manual because there is just a lot of confusion in this area. And so the questions that you're asking are really great. It helps inform us, what do we need to explain more clearly? What do we need to include in that training manual. So thank you for being engaged.
Absolutely. Jackie, thanks for flagging that. Nathan, can we back up one slide that comes to the table, which I feel like people could just really soak and have this, just looking at this process going forward. This is, and Jackie is correct. We will be taking this webinar and creating a recording that will be posted. So we will have that ability, and then we'll also highly likely create a PDF out of this particular chart for folks to have as this just a reference going forward. Anything else that you want to talk about as far as like the state and the federal permitting? Because again, some of these are a little bit deeper.
Yes. And I guess I'll mention that that's right, Jackie. This, our program is strictly dredge and fill. So we are the counterpart. We are the gap filler, for the federal 404 program. So again, CADX, for example, is an exclusion from the NEPA process, but that doesn't, if you're working in a WOTUS, you would still need a 404 permit. If you're working in a non-WOTUS, you will still need a state authorization. And also there is a section of the regulation that we worked on pretty extensively. That's in let's see, it's 87 point. If anybody cares to actually look at the regulatory language on this, but it's 87.3 subsection 7, and the intent is to walk through that federal versus state jurisdiction and kind of what project proponents are expected to do to kind of figure out which agency, state, or the Corps that they should be working with. So that's 87.3 subsection 7, to the extent that helps. And then Kelly, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat just our email for the program. If you have questions, you can reach out via that email and we'll get back with you.
Great. No, thank you, Annette, so much. I know projects can be so location specific.
Yes.
Unique context. And thank you so much for the open door for the consultation and the, being available by email, because every project operates in its own set of just circumstances with that. So
yes. And we've learned a lot by partnering with the Corps during this whole process that, that's kind of the main message, is that every project is different and unique. And that's why, the consultation and collaboration with us is important going forward.
Absolutely.
Abby, I see another question that hasn't been answered, that it was kind of related to what I was talking about earlier. The question is, are all waters on federal land considered part of federal jurisdiction? I'm wondering if any projects on Forest Service, BLM, National Park, Department of Defense, etc., would be subject to this new state regulation. So the answer is yes. If you're working on federal land, you still have to go through the same analysis. Are you working in a perennial stream, intermittent, or ephemeral? Is it a WOTUS or a non-WOTUS? And then you know what permit you need to get based on whether, if it's a WOTUS, then you're going to go get your nationwide 27. If it's non-WOTUS, then you're going to get a general authorization equivalent to the nationwide 27. So I hope that answers that person's question there.
Yeah, the one exception to that is national parks. That's so in Colorado, Rocky Mountain National Park, Mesa Verde, and national monuments, if they're called lands of exclusive federal jurisdiction, and that's where the state doesn't have authority. But that's the one exception.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you. I did not know that. I learned something new today. Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. That's great. Well, thank you. We're getting down towards the end of our audience questions coming in. But I do want to just give us space. Kelly and Annette both, there was a lot of discussion around water rights within Regulation 87. Could you just talk a little bit about how water rights may factor into projects, going forward under Regulation 87, or just present some of the discussion that happened around that, whatever you feel would be appropriate for this audience?
Yeah, I can start and then maybe Kelly can jump in. Uh, we, everything that that the division does in implementing this program, is also subject to the Water Rights Administration statutes. And so, any authorization that we issue, has to be cognizant of water rights and potential injury to downstream water rights or senior water rights. That being said, it's really the onus is really on the project proponent to make those determinations, on their end when planning for a project, and make sure they've done their due diligence with the Division of Water Resources to make sure that their project is compliant and not going to injure existing water rights. So that's how we framed Regulation 87. Is that in that it's really the project proponent's responsibility. And so I know you all are probably much more attuned to that, just being familiar with, the federal framework and, obtaining 404 permits. It's the same thing, under our framework. And Kelly, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, you're exactly right. Yeah, it would be on the applicant, the project proponent, to make that decision for themselves.
Yeah, and we do have the Water Quality Control Division will be consulting with the Division of Water Resources on certain projects, namely, bigger projects and definitely water supply projects, things like that. But again, we just encourage folks to reach out to them, to the Division of Water Resources within DNR to kind of, if you have questions about water rights.
Yeah, thank you. I know that really helped a lot of folks. That was a great explanation. We do have a couple questions that have kind of come in, and I'm going to try to consolidate these into one. That there have been a lot of references around nationwide permit 27. Will the general authorizations match the other nationwide permits too, like 14 or 13? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I'll let Kelly handle that.
Sure. Yes. So in general, the state version of the regional general permit and nationwide permit will mirror exactly what's in the federal permits, with maybe some exemptions. I'll just note also that we will be developing Colorado specific conditions that will apply to projects. So there may be some different requirements than what folks are used to at the federal level, just because some of the nationwide conditions don't apply to projects that are being conducted in Colorado. But yes, for the most part, our general authorizations will mirror the requirements in the federal permitting framework.
Perfect. Thank you. And we just had an additional question kind of come in around, and again, thank you all for the great, rich questions on this. It's really, we're all in this together and learning together, and just appreciate the thoughtfulness here. But the latest question that's come in is around state authorizations, and will it cover local requirements, or will county specific authorizations still be needed? I don't know if we've talked about county yet today. Could we comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, this came up a bit during the rulemaking, and we added some language into Regulation 87 that specifies that, county requirements are still going to be, in effect. And there are some consultation. We haven't dealt, well, actually we have. And this is of course case specific, and, jurisdiction specific. I know Boulder County wants to work closely with us to coordinate on projects. And, we also heard from Fort Collins, so Larimer County, and Kelly might have more to add about folks that have contacted them. But I guess the bottom line is county requirements will still be in effect. And we would like to coordinate with programs, with counties that, or even, towns that have their own wetland programs to make sure we're doing things consistently. And that's, I guess it's going to be a work in progress, as to how we, coordinate with those local jurisdictions. But both sets of requirements would be in place for projects.
Abby, I'll just add a little bit to that for folks who may not be familiar with what a local permit would possibly look like in a stream restoration project. And what that's really getting at is floodplain administration rules. And some counties that have fully mapped FEMA floodplains, then their county floodplain administrator is in charge of issuing any permits for activities that might occur within that FEMA mapped floodplain. So that's what question is really getting at. And on the west slope, for the most part, we don't have FEMA mapped floodplains. You don't have county administrators, floodplain administrators, requiring permits in the floodplain, but it is very much a thing on the Front Range. So that's kind of what it's getting at.
Thank you all. And I don't see any additional questions, and I put the last call in the chat, but I would like to offer each of you, Jackie, Annette, Kelly, in whatever order, any final thoughts for folks before we sign off.
I would like to just thank everybody for being here, and Abby and Jackie for your partnership in this. It's been truly a collaborative process, and I guess the main point I'd like to make going forward is that it will continue to be a collaborative process. We're all kind of learning this together, and kind of it really is taking a village in this circumstance to build this program. So we respect all of your expertise and experience in this field, and you've taught us a lot, and we'll continue to rely on you if you don't mind. But thank you so much.
Absolutely, Annette. Your door is open all the time, and thank you for your partnership as well. Kelly or Jackie, other thoughts too?
Sure. I'll just add, I think, Annette captured it perfectly, that we are all learning this together, and, the division is available when anybody has questions, either broad scope or even project specific. We're happy to help. And I think these types of questions that have been presented during this meeting are really helpful for us as we kind of develop frequently asked questions and responses to those, as well as guidance and things like that. So we really appreciate the questions and some of the feedback, and welcome that moving forward.
Wonderful. Kelly, thank you. Jackie?
I'll just add that there continues to be quite a need in this area for more resources and education like this webinar, and especially when folks are trying to still learn SB 270 and how that works, and then layer upon it Reg 87. So Abby and I are going to continue to be working on different ways to help our the Healthy Headwaters working members and anybody else who's working in this space on stream restoration to understand this. So this is just the first of the webinars for the year.
Yes, it is just February. It feels a little later in the year than that, but thank you. Well, I just want to reflect a huge amount of gratitude back to you all as speakers today for the wealth of knowledge that you have shared with our audience. I think we have all walking away learning something new today. And that is the beauty of coming together and working together. And truly, we believe collaboratively and coming together, we make better decisions. And so just thank you all for your time today. Nathan, thank you for driving the presentation and keeping us all together today. And we look forward to staying in touch as our partnership evolves and as feedback comes in around Regulation 87 and restoration projects. We're happy to be a conduit. And we really look forward to the next time that we see each other either in person at an event or online. We hope you found this event helpful today, and we look forward to seeing you down the line. So have a great rest of your day, everyone, and we will see you soon.